Welcome to the next podcast of Millinery.Info. I'm your host, Lauren Ritchie, and it's so wonderful to welcome you to this episode of Millinery.Info. In this series, we get to welcome leading milliners from across the globe into your ears and studio. It's so wonderful today to welcome Jane Fries to the episode. Jane shares with us about how she discovered fish leather and turned it into her own before introducing it into the millinery industry. Thank you so much to our Patreon podcast sponsors for their support of this series. It wouldn't be possible without them. Jennifer Hertz Millinery, the Millinery Retreat School of Millinery, HATlok Australia, Hat Academy, Hatters Millinery Supplies, Judith M. Millinery Supply House, Hats by Lico, Lifted Millinery, Louise McDonald Milliner, Millinery Australia, The Hat Magazine, and Barcelona Hat Days, along with welcoming HATalk to the lineup. You can find a link to each of these businesses in our show notes, either on the podcast app or through our website. I'd also like to thank HATalk and Hat Academy for sharing the podcast series on their platforms. However you found this episode today, I hope you enjoy it. If you'd like to show your support, you can head across to our Patreon page and sign up to our 2 tiers. Thank you so much, Jane, for joining me on today's podcast. It's wonderful to have you as part of the Millinery.Info series.
That's my pleasure. Yeah, a real honor. Thank you for asking me.
Could you take us back to the beginning of your millinery career? How did it come into your life?
So I used to work at the BBC. I've always had a career in the film industry. And I was working at the BBC, walking past London College of Fashion. And I noticed that they had Saturday courses. They were running millinery, silver jewelry making, and beadwork. And my job's quite technical, and I was really craving something creative. So I went in and I signed up for millinery. I thought I'll do that first, and then I'll do the other two. And over that 9 weeks, I just totally fell in love with it. So I never did the others, and that's how I started.
Oh, amazing. What were the projects that captured you?
I think the first thing, so I had a lovely tutor who's sadly not with us anymore, but a man called Andrew Bristow. And the first thing he taught us, as you often do with beginners, is felt, blocking felt. And he used to block this felt. And he would say to me, "Is this millinery or therapy?" I'm like, I just loved it. And I used to do sculpture, and I think it was very sculptural, the felt, the way it almost feels like clay sometimes when you've got it just to that right consistency and you're pulling it over a shape. So that's what we did first. And we did 9 Saturdays. And I noticed there was a girl who sat opposite me. She only ever sewed in class, and she sewed quite slowly. And by the end of 9 weeks, she'd made a sort of buckram headband with wire around it in her head fitting, and I'd made 5 hats because I used to go home and sew, and then come back to ask him more.
Oh,
So,
wow.
and the other thing I learned from him was how to chat and sew at the same time.
That's an important
A
skill as
very
well.
important skill. Yeah. Don't stop sewing when you're chatting.
So from those Saturdays, what came next? What was the next step for you?
The next step, so I did every course you could. So they used to do beginners, intermediate, I did several times, then advanced. And then I can't remember, I think one of the girls on the course, who's lovely Helen, has stayed my friend ever since. I think she found Rose Cory and said, "Oh, let's go into deepest, darkest Southeast London and learn with Rose." So that's what we did. And we started off because she worked. So I was freelance by then, I think, and working
Yes.
odd days. We started off going Saturdays when she could go. And then I just got obsessed. I would go every day. I wasn't working. I'd drive over there and learn with Rose. So that was my next step.
We've had a few people who've learned from Rose. It's like an amazing network of people she taught at her house. Is that correct?
No, she used to teach
Where
in,
did
I
you
think it
go?
was called Shrewsbury House. It was a community centre. It's a big old house, and it seemed to have a library and little girls doing ballet downstairs. But what I remember is old and woody. The sun always seemed to shine. You had to scrabble for a space in the car park. But Rose upstairs, she had a big teaching room with desks and green baize on. And then she had the block cupboard that stayed there all the time. So she was sort of semi-permanent there. I
Yeah.
think she did Thursday through to Saturday. What was lovely about it was the mix of milliners. So you never knew who was going to be there. And and what everyone was learning, it was kind of organized chaos because everyone was doing something different.
Yes.
And I pretty soon learned to have a couple of projects on the go
Yes.
because I think Tracy mentioned it, you had to wait for her to come round. So once I caught her, I would say, right, what about this one? And what do I do next on this one? And also you could watch as well. I learned a lot from watching. I realized that there was a really fabulous lady called Peggy, and she made loads of hats for her husband. And it was
Yeah.
a similar hat, it was cut and sewn. And somehow
Mhm.
by osmosis, I know how to make that hat. And when I needed to
I
make
can see
it,
that.
I'm like, oh, I remember Rose saying that to Peggy. So it's really nice to be learning, even though you didn't want to make what someone else is making,
Yeah.
it was going in.
Yes. Yeah, and the
I
exposure to
really,
the different techniques that you might
yeah,
not have thought of yourself.
yes. And I learned so much there, and not just about millinery. Learned a lot
Yes.
over those years.
Amazing. And the network as well you would have built with different people coming through as well.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it was incredible the people that I met, and some I've met again and again over those
Yeah.
years, and others. Then I met a woman at a party the other day, and she's an embroiderer.
Yes.
But when I told her what I did, she said, "Oh, who did you learn with?" And when I told her, she said, "Oh, I had lessons with her." And it's that really funny connection. Sometimes people haven't gone on to make hats, but they somehow ended up studying with Rose.
I know the legend. And when did you take the dive into millinery? You were still freelancing in the film space?
Yes, I've carried on doing that. I never
Yes.
stopped. I just tailored it so they've kind of dovetailed into each other.
Yeah.
And now I only work on commercials, which are very short contracts. So I kind of balance it. And sometimes, I'll be shooting, and trying to make a hat at the same time. But I just try to, yeah, it's always all or nothing with everything. So yeah, somehow it muddles along. I don't quite sew on set, but sometimes it's close.
It's tempting.
Tempting, yeah, tempting and a boring bit. Yeah.
And did you return back to college during that time with Rose, or
So
where
what
did
I
millinery
did
take you?
was Rose suggested that I apply for QEST, which is the Queen Elizabeth Scholarship Trust. So I applied for that while I was studying with her. And what I applied to do was for it to continue to pay for my studies with Rose and also
Oh,
to go to Kensington and Chelsea. And I was lucky enough to be awarded a scholarship. And that's what I did. So I carried on with Rose and then but because I was working, they were so lovely at Kensington and Chelsea. What they let me do was what did I do? A term. Somehow I was dropping in and out over 2 years.
yeah.
So I did one term with one lot of students,
Yes.
and then the head tutor was fabulous. When she realized what I was doing, she's like, "Well, don't worry, if you can't come in on a Thursday, then pop in on a day you can, and I'll catch you up." So sometimes she'd
Oh,
just
wow.
give me an hour's catch up with what they've been doing. Yeah, it was such a
Fantastic.
lovely thing to do. And again, I met loads of people then who I still see. So
Amazing.
a really nice time.
How did what you were doing at Kensington and Chelsea differ to what maybe you'd been learning with Rose?
Yeah, that's interesting because when I said that I was going to Kensington and Chelsea, the couple of the Rose's students were like, "Why would you go there? Because she's the best teacher. Why would you go and learn from someone else?" And I think that kind of formed what the way I always learn and teach is I just wanted a different experience. I wasn't saying that Rose wasn't the best teacher, but actually I wanted to meet other milliners, meet other people and see what else was going on. And of
Yeah.
course, it is very different. I learned from Ian Bennett and other tutors there who just did things. I think with traditional millinery, I think there are people's view of the techniques you should be using. But
Yes.
actually, when you travel and learn, you realize that other people have a very different way of doing things, which they think are the traditional way.
Yes.
So that's always been my thing to learn from lots of different people. And and when I'm teaching, it always comes back and helps me because sometimes you just can't do it the way you've been taught. It just doesn't work. And then in the
Yeah.
back of your head, it's like, what did I learn? Somebody did something there. There's
Deep,
even
deep, deep back in there, there's another
yeah,
option.
exactly, exactly. And I remember teaching when I first got to Australia to teach. The first thing I was terrified. And this class of students, I stood up and I gave my little spiel, and then I said so what we're going to do is start this way. And the woman at the back of the class said, "Why are you doing it that way? We haven't been taught that way." So I said, okay. I said, look, you can either do it the way you've been taught, or you can do it my way, and then you know two ways, and you can decide which you like. I was
Yes.
like, okay. But it's funny, yeah, she by the end of the day, she was my, my best student. But that moment was like, oh no, I don't know what to say to you. But yeah,
So once you had finished the work at Kensington Chelsea and you've been taking classes at Rose's as well, did you have, when you were doing that, a goal in mind of where you wanted to see it go, or you wanted to switch your
no,
career, or what was happening?
no, no. And I think for me, I always call it a millinery journey. It hasn't been a career. It's been a journey. And I just feel really lucky that every time I'm kind of coasting a bit with it, another experience pops up. And I think because I had Rose behind me, I always said yes to things. So people would ask me to do a commission, I'd be, yes, of course I can. And then I'm running back to Rose and go, how do you do this? And kept learning. And I think once I'd got QEST, getting QEST is an amazing thing.
Yes.
So do you know about
I
it?
know a little about it, but maybe for those who aren't as familiar, could you tell
Okay.
us what did that mean for you in that space?
QEST is the Queen Elizabeth Scholarship Trust. And what it does is provides funding for training and education of talented makers. And it was founded by the Royal Warrant Holders Association. It provides funding for training and education of craftspeople. So with them, you have to be already working in your craft.
Mhm.
They have to perceive you as excellent, and then they
Yes.
continue to pay for your funding. So
Amazing.
that's been an amazing journey. And
Yeah.
every time what I didn't realize when I applied for it was that they don't let you go. They're there to support you for the whole of your career or journey. They've always got new experiences, new opportunities for you,
Oh,
and they're happy to share them. So through that, I've done a lot of amazing things.
amazing. So are you still connected with them now, even many
Yeah,
years afterwards?
yeah, many years after it. Yes, because they stay in your life. So for instance, we're going to talk about highlights of my career. I think my highlight of my
Beautiful.
career was meeting Her Majesty the Queen, the late Queen.
Wow. Yes.
So I was asked to participate in an exhibition, a selling exhibition in Fortnum and Mason, which is a department store, very high-end department store in London. And I had my hats in there, and then I was asked if I'd like to meet the Queen. So I said yes, of course. And
Funny that.
they
Does
decided,
someone say no to that, do they? That's odd to me.
I don't think anyone says no. I know people who've refused to go to a garden party at the palace,
Hmm.
but that
It was
wasn't
a
me.
yes for you. It was a yes for you.
Would be a yes for me. So, and the day before, I decided what hat I was going to wear, decided on my outfit. And the day before, a production company rang me up and said, "Oh, we're making a documentary about the Queen. It was her Diamond Jubilee, and they were making a film about her Diamond Jubilee, and they were going to be filming the next day, and they asked if I would mind them filming me getting ready. And I talked to my husband, and he's like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, we can clear the house. It'll be fine. We'll clear the house. We'll send the dog away. It'll all be fine." So we did like massive clear
In
of
the
the house.
crew.
Yeah, and then in the evening, I said to him, "I think I've changed my mind about what I want to wear." So I changed what I wore, and I made a new hat overnight to wear in the morning. And I was so tired and so frazzled that when the film crew came round, I don't know what I did with the tea. I put chamomile tea and builder's tea and everything in the pot and made this disgusting concoction. And they filmed me, and wanted to film me getting ready. And when they said that, I thought, actually, I don't want them to film me putting my clothes on. What are they thinking? So I steamed the hat, and they filmed that,
Good
which was
promotion.
nice. Yeah, and then I went to Fortnum and Mason's and met the Queen, and that was fun because there's so much protocol, and you're really looked after. You're really told what to expect. And I had these massive high heels on for some odd reason, and we had to cut. We were taught to curtsy, so I had these
Yes.
huge heels, and I thought the only way I'm going to get through this is to stand with my legs crossed, ready to curtsy. So I stood
Yeah.
that for half an hour while I waited for her to come round to then do this mad curtsy. So.
And how was the curtsy? Did it
The
was
curtsy
successful in the end?
fine. I did get
Yes.
the giggles because of something that someone else said to her about working in a garage, which is quite funny. But then she comes and she's very prepared. She has this
Mm.
way, or she had this way of making you feel like you're the only person in the room. She really
What a
connects and
talent.
she's been briefed and, it all stays in her head. So
Mm.
first of all, she said, oh, I understand you were trained by my mother's milliner. So I said, yes, that's right. She said, oh, yes, I remember meeting her. We had a little chat about that. And she said, and then, so one of the hats I was selling was made of fish leather and she had never heard of it. So yeah, I explained fish leather to her, which was, sometimes you think I'm in the middle of Fortnum and Mason talking to the Queen about fish leather. That's quite mad,
But
but
how
very.
brilliant.
It was brilliant. And then there's a really sweet little clip that was on the news. As she walked away from me, she said to one of her aides, fish leather, how hilarious.
Quest sound like an amazing opportunity. When you were studying, what did that mean for you? Did it like, do they give you a set amount of funds, or is it just the cost of the training? I guess it depends on what the trade is that they're supporting.
Depends what the training is.
Yeah.
So it's quite interesting now because now I'm a skills assessor for
Ah,
QEST.
yes. Yes.
So I get to look at the application forms, and it's really interesting the whole range of things that people apply for. Because
Yeah.
when I applied, I was very, I think it was quite early on, I was quite naive. And I remember applying for the two things I wanted to do, and I kept it very much in my sphere. And
Yes.
Deirdre Hawkin, who sadly has just passed away, she had the Quest scholarship before I did. And she asked me, well, she said, congratulations on joining us. How much did you apply for? And when I told her, she's like, you donut. You could have done this and this. And I went to New York and I felt really stupid. Like, why didn't I really investigate what I could do? So I was really happy with what I did and I don't regret it. But now when people get in touch and ask me about Quest, I will say, really think about what you want to do. Don't, it's not about the money limiting you.
Mm,
It's quite a hard thing to get your head around because you feel like it's going to be like a job interview, and it's
mhm.
not at all. It's a charity wanting to support you in whatever you want to do, as long as you passionately want to do it and it makes sense for your career.
Yes.
So to answer your question, the funding, it sometimes it covers travel. Um, it covers the teaching that you might want, materials if they are, if you, yeah, if they're part of what you're doing. So for instance, if you applied to do a course in fish leather, it would cover the fish, which is expensive.
Yes.
So
So
it
if it
covers
was something that was maybe building a
something.
skill in a certain area, it would maybe
Yes,
cover the
yeah.
materials for that. So once you finished, was there a certain duration in which that supported you for?
Money-wise, to the end of the course, I think I'd got a certain amount to carry on studying with Rose, and then enough for the Kensington and Chelsea fees. And once that finished, I thought it would be the end of it. And then just opportunities came rolling in of
Amazing.
exhibitions and collaborations. Quest are very keen on collaborations,
Yeah.
which is nice. I had this, I've always had this dream to make a hat out of my own hair. So at one point, I had my
Yes.
hair chopped quite short and I kept the hair. And years later, I came up with a hat that I wanted to make. I think it was for a competition. And they put me in touch with a wig maker and she made victory rolls, which then attached onto the hat.
Amazing.
So that was a really nice experience. And it's really nice they encourage you to work with other artists. So you
Yeah.
really expand what you're doing.
I guess you're part of they can connect you with a Quest scholarship,
Yes.
which is
And it's
excellent.
also, it is a family thing. You can ring up any Quest scholar and ask them stuff. There's some kind of, if someone says to me, "Oh, I'm from Quest," whatever they wanted, I would try and do. You have that sort of bond of
Amazing
whether you've
connection.
met or not, because we meet each other. They have Christmas parties and summer drinks and things, and often you'll be doing an exhibition with people you've never met. But yeah, we have
Amazing.
this really amazing bond.
Yeah.
It's
When
nice.
you were studying, were you building up a collection? What was the study working towards?
At Kensington and Chelsea, I was kind of doing what I was doing and learning. And with Rose, I used to, because what was really weird, and I think it happens to a lot of milliners, you start to learn millinery and suddenly your friends and family become your clients. Someone's going to a wedding and they want this. And I used to DJ there were four of us called the Shellac Sisters, and we dressed in vintage, mainly vintage clothes, and we always
Mhm.
needed hats. So at the time, I was making hats for them at the same time as I
Yeah.
was learning. I've never, have I ever done, I'm just thinking, have I done a collection? The only time I've done actual collections, like a
Mm.
proper milliner, is when I've entered competitions that needed, like the hat competition, I entered a couple of
Yeah.
years, and you make a collection that's cohesive. But the rest of the time, I'm a scattergun mess, just doing all sorts.
So you just felt like it was never like an official launch. You just started word of
No,
mouth customers coming to ask for a hat.
yes, and my thing has always been recycling. Even when I was at Rose's, that she,
Yes.
I didn't realize she was telling us a story, but I decided that I wanted to make a Stetson out of my old Levi jeans. So I came in with my Levi jeans and I said to Rose, can I make this into a Stetson? And her block cupboard, we used to joke that she used to go and she would say to you, go and put the kettle on. And she would disappear into the block cupboard. And when she came out, I'd
Yep.
say, were you laughing or crying? And and yeah, she told the story about this steps and me just turning up saying, I want to do this. And I used to love the way she thought. She kind of think on her feet. She would be going back through that Rolodex for her head. It's like, how are we going to make this work?
Yes.
And so I used to make a lot of hats out of recycled things. So this was in the early 2000s before it
Yes.
became a huge
Yeah.
thing. But it was nice. So I kind of got a reputation for making things out of people's old clothes. So customers would ring me up and say, "Oh, I've got, oh, I don't know, I've got a jacket." I had a guy who rang me up. He said, "I've got five jackets and a pair of python skin jeans. I want them all made into hats." So
Amazing.
yeah, so I did that, and then I had another lovely woman who was I think she was in her late 70s by the time I met her, and she was
Yes.
going on a road trip with her niece in a sports car, and she wanted turbans made out of her silk scarf collection so that she had something to keep her hair neat while she was traveling. So we had so much fun making those, and it was a really nice thing to do because I think a friend of mine still says that I'm more chat than hat. And and that's the part that I loved. I loved meeting this lady. She's called Mrs. Sadler. And the first day she came to me, but my flat was up a lot of stairs. And she was so out of breath after that. I said to her, shall I come to you next time? And she would always book me in at 6 o'clock and we'd talk about the
Mm.
hats. And then we'd have a small sherry. And then I'd go
Oh.
home. And yeah, that's the part I love about it.
It's the story though, too, particularly when you're working with material textile that they already have it, there's sentiment too. It comes with knowledge and story
It
time.
comes with stories. Yeah, it does. I mean, I was terrible. I think I always, I always laugh when people say to me, "Oh, how do you price your hats?" And
Mm.
how do you, oh God, if I was a lawyer, honestly, but I'd have brides, mothers of the bride and the bridesmaids coming around to my tiny flat in Notting Hill, and we'd sit there for hours drinking wine. I think I used to spend my whole profits on wine then. And chatting about this and that and the wedding, and then you get invited to the wedding, and it becomes a part of everything.
And then you're away for the weekend, and then
Yeah, it hasn't made me rich for sure. I've had the best time.
and one of the things you've become quite iconic for is the use of fish leather. How did this come about? Where did this get introduced to your work?
So the fish leather started with an article in one of the London papers, the freebies you get on the tube, the underground. So I was
Yes.
reading that on the underground coming home, and there was a picture of a model in a fish leather bikini. It's made of salmon skin. And I thought, wow, if you can, I'd never heard of it, but I thought if you can make a bikini out of salmon skin, you could probably make a hat. So it was when I think was it 2003. It was kind of early computers. You could find people's email. You could obviously search. I don't know when Google came in, but you could search. So Helen and my mate Helen, and I tracked down the designer. She's called Claudia Escobar. She was a Chilean designer. And we sent her an email, and she emailed back and she said, "Oh, I'm in London. Shall we meet for coffee?" So we went and met her for a coffee, and she bought some scraps of the
Yes.
salmon skin she'd had tanned in Chile, for us to experiment with. And that's how it started. Just more chat. And then there was a bit of a hiatus because she went off to Scotland and we sort of lost touch with her and we'd lost our supply of fish leather. And it took me a long time to find fish leather that worked because the only fish leather I could find was very much like shoe leather
Yes.
and I needed
Very
it to be
thick.
more like glove leather. Yeah. So I can't remember how this happened, but there's a German company who were producing salmon leather, and somehow they ended up in my kitchen in Notting Hill. They wanted to see, I think they thought that I was a huge milliner working in fish leather. And they came round, had a look at the kitchen, and showed me the samples of fish leather that they had. And then we went out for
Yes.
lunch, chat, and they became my supplier
Oh,
for a
wow.
long time. And that
Yes.
meant I could really experiment with it because I had a regular kind of supply. And then London Hat Week was coming up, and Georgina asked me if I'd teach a workshop. And I kind of created this headband with roses on, and I
Yes.
started teaching that. And that went on for a while, and I loved that teaching. And about the same time, St. Martin's had contacted me. So I was
Yes.
teaching there as well. And so I kind of fell into that and just
Yeah.
loved it. It's funny how
Incredible.
you go from being student suddenly to teacher. And all the time I was thinking, well, I need to learn more. I went to Sweden to learn about fish leather tanning
Oh,
because I
wow.
wanted to be one step ahead of the students.
Yes.
And that was a whole other experience. It's-
Oh, wow. So when you were working with that German supplier, were you able to help them refine the product and the leather that you needed for that for hats? Or were you just working with
Oh,
what they
they
had?
were very much their leather was exactly what I needed.
Oh, great.
So I didn't get involved in their kind of production or anything. In fact, I never have anywhere. I've been to last year I went to Iceland as a Icelandic fish leather tannery. And I don't feel it's my place to do that. The only thing I do, when I came and taught in Australia, um, we spent a lot of time trying to find the right fish leather in Australia, and in the
Yes.
end, we had to bring the German leather over because as I learned on this tanning course, it's not particularly about the species of fish; it's about the process of tanning.
Ah, yes.
A bit
Yes.
to do with the age of the fish, but a lot to do with the tanning process, taking the membranes off, making it soft and supple. And and I think especially if you're making flowers, if you want something, that my thing has always been to make couture hats from
Mm,
whatever I'm making. I don't want it to have that rough kind of crafty look particularly. That's not what I'm looking for. So
yes.
yeah, I'm always really specific about the leather that I use.
Yeah. Oh, amazing. Where else has fish leather taken you?
It's it's taken me to Norway. I went to teach in Norway. There are a group of milliners led by Stina, and they wanted to learn fish leather. So they all got together, and I went to teach them a week-long workshop in Norway. And that was amazing. It was just, yeah, another kind of pinch me moment. They put me in a little hotel that was lovely, and every day we'd go into this classroom and I would teach them. And then every evening, Stina had organized something because she said it's expensive in Norway. I don't want to add to everybody's expenses. And the first night she'd cooked for us and we ate in her atelier. It was lovely. And then one night, her dad came and picked us up, and he had to pick us up in two lots because there were so many of us, and drove us out to her parents' house where her mum had cooked for us. And it was just
Lovely.
such an amazing experience. Really, really
Oh,
getting to know somewhere you're teaching. That was
yeah.
nice.
It's incredible.
It's really
And
incredible. And then I spent a lot of time going backwards and forwards to the
mm,
Netherlands because in fact, my first class, Ellie Steemerdink had come to do the class to find out
yeah,
about fish leather, and that's how I got to know her. And then she asked me if I'd be a judge for their Prince's Hat Day. So I
yes.
went and did that. So I've kind of gone back, and then I taught there. I met more people in the Netherlands and taught there a few times. It's just been a
Amazing.
yeah, and I think fish leather it's a fun millinery thing. It's not serious. You can't be serious about wearing a fish on your head. You have to take it with a little bit of joy.
And were you teaching at Kensington and Chelsea? Is that something you still do a little bit of, or how did that?
Oh, at St. Martin's.
Yeah, sorry,
Yeah.
it's St. Martin's. Yes.
The St. Martin's, I've no idea how I got that job. I thought they'd got the wrong person. I said, I'm Jane. I'm not. I thought there must be another Jane who's a milliner who they
Yes,
want to
Jane
teach.
Smith.
No,
This
no,
is
no,
Jane
no.
Fry.
No, it's you. I rang Ian up and I said, what? Because he'd just left there. I knew he'd been teaching there. And I said, I've been asked to teach there. What shall I do? And he said, go and do it. He said, you'll absolutely love it. He said, you'll be terrified, but you'll love it. So I really did. On the first course I taught, I thought actually it is possible to die of fright.
Oh no.
I picked up all the students, got to the classroom, and I thought,
Now what?
um, and then all the tension was broken by one of the girls fainting.
Oh, so
Because
it wasn't you fainting though.
I didn't faint, she fainted. And I thought, oh no, I don't know about first aid and health and safety. And luckily, because the classrooms are in bays, so you can actually hear what's going on in the next classroom, there must have been a thud. The woman in the next classroom, one of the students came out. She said, "Oh, don't worry, I'm a first aider." So she helped this girl. We got her some water. It turned out she'd come from Ireland that morning and hadn't had any breakfast or drunk anything.
Oh,
And it was hot in there. So that was fine. But yeah, that first course, I learned on the fly. And all the time in my head, I could hear Rose teaching. And I just thought, I'm gonna approach this like Rose does. And I let everybody do what they want. And it was kind of mayhem and chaos. And by the end of the week, I think there were 12 students had made 2 or 3 hats each.
wow.
Looking at them, I thought, I can't believe, I don't know where that's come from
What a feat.
to enable them to do that. And yeah, I totally fell in love with that.
Wow.
It's amazing. And I'm constantly, and I found over the years that Monday and Tuesday, they go really slowly. It's really lovely. Everyone's deciding what they want to do and learning about blocks. And it gets halfway through Wednesday and someone goes, "We're halfway through. Oh no." And then it's like a roller coaster, when you get to the top and you're going downhill and it's
Off we
chaos
go.
for them. And there's always a moment with somebody's hat. I wake up in the night and think, "Oh, I have no idea how we're going to do that. How are we going to do that? There must be a way. There must be a way." Sometimes I ring Ian and go, I don't know what to do with this one. But often I think, oh, there must be. We did a bit like that and a bit like that, and you should do that. And so, yeah, you work out that you do actually know how to attach a train to a hat if somebody needs it.
I take it that's something you figured out how to do.
Absolutely. Yep, there was a guy going to Barcelona. He was going straight from London to Barcelona, and he was making a huge hat, and he wanted a train track around the outside with a train. And I remember attaching a
Brilliant.
small piano to a hat, and I thought, oh, I'm going to do it the same way. And it was great when I lived in London. I think Judy would say the same. You end up with half your studio at St. Martin's by the end of the week. So I'd got my dad's old tiny drill to drill through the train so that we could sew it onto the hat. If anyone needs to know, you need a tiny drill, just drill a hole in it. It's a bit like attaching feathers, but it's a train. It's fine.
Wild things that you can mount in a house.
Yeah, anything goes on a hat. Oh, I tell you though, it's all
Um,
about balance. That's what popped into my head. One of the worst, well, the best and the worst experiences I had with hats. When I was at Kensington and Chelsea, I entered the felt makers competition. And in the spirit of recycling, I decided what I wanted to do. I was going to make 2 giant roses out of some kind of dark red old felt hats that I'd found in Portobello Market. So I chopped them
yes.
up into petals. I just locked myself in my flat for a weekend to make them, and had these huge roses, and I put them on a wire felt covered frame. So we had stalks and what are those pointy things, thorns, all of that sticking up. And I got it in the last day, entered the competition,
Yes.
and it was really nice. I got second prize, and I was really happy with that because Justin Smith beat me. That's all fine. That's the way it should be. And about six
You
months
get
later.
tempted to post fight anyone, Justin's a good fun.
Exactly. That's fine. I'm cool with that. Um, about 6 months later, I was out with a friend of mine, and she said, "Oh, my mum and dad were at the Felt Makers award ceremony when your hat was shown," and she said it was all going well until the hat fell off the model's head. So I'm like, oh, okay. And that really taught me about balance. I think it's one thing having a hat on a mannequin head in your kitchen, and another
Yes,
thing walking down a runway.
different experience.
Yeah, yeah,
But the Felt Makers Guild is another fantastic initiative within the
yeah.
UK.
Yes,
It's
yes.
such a cool opportunity to explore felt, and the competition still runs as well, which is
Yes,
fantastic.
competition, yes, it's still running. And it's such an amazing, I'd encourage anyone to enter it because what's happened is that the designs have got more and more unusual and fantastic as people realize what you can do with felt. I think
Yeah,
that's the lovely thing about when you're learning or when you're making something for a competition, you really get the chance to play and explore. And that's
Yes.
kind of what I miss about, and I try to build it in. I think lots of milliners say that, I try to build playing with stuff into my life. And it's really hard to do that, to find the time just to go, oh, I'm just going to see what this does. Because often,
Explore.
as with the silk abaco, you're trying to make something for a client and
Yes.
kind of learning on the hoof, and you don't have all that time to. I mean, I think that's what the internet's great for, isn't it? Because you can find someone who's teaching you. You can go, right, I'm just going to do that quick lesson and work out what that does.
Learn from the best.
Yeah, totally. The
Give me.
same year that I entered the slightly disastrous feltmakers competition, I entered and won the Italian competition, which is called Capelli nel Mondo. So I can't remember whether I knew I'd won or whether they very much encouraged me to fly to Italy with my dad. Decided he'd like a trip and he came with me.
Lovely.
So
Go, Dad.
yeah, it was great. And I got over there and found out that I'd won, which was really nice. It was quite scary because I didn't realize that they then wanted me to do various things like go and talk to dignitaries. And I rocked up. I'm all or nothing. So I'm either in full glam or jeans. And unfortunately, I only had one full glam for the presentation dinner. And to meet the dignitaries, I wore my jeans, which was very bad. At least I had a hat on, but
What was the hat you made for this winning competition?
so that was it was a recycled Paul Costello jacket, and it was in the colours of the Italian flag.
Oh,
And the jacket was a kind of tweed, it was a sort of tweed, and I made it into uh, a square beret, and then it had just two quills on it, kind of curled. They weren't curled in a loop, they were sort of curled in an arc.
yes.
It was really simple, but it was quite a striking shape. And also, I think possibly the colors helped.
Yes. Possibly, but also it just sounds like
Possibly.
it's a brilliant hat.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. Especially coming you worked at. Did I also see, did you enter the hat magazine competition as well when it was running? Is that right?
Yes, I did.
Yes.
Yeah. So I
Yes.
entered the first year I entered with Helen. We did a joint entry. I think that was the fish leather year. We had our little bits of fish leather and we put them in. And I think it was the Swarovski year, so that we put a lot of crystals into the scale pit. So the little dips in the fish leather, we put crystals in. And then the next year, did I? Oh, there was the Tressa braid year that I entered. I think that was the furthest I got, maybe to the final. And yeah, and then that was another thing. So I was teaching myself to braid. So I braided 6 hats with this beautiful braid. It's just yeah, that was such a great competition. That's good.
What a challenge too. So there was a theme for each year. Is that
Each year, I think there was a sponsor each year. So you had to use that. Yeah, you had to use whatever that material was. So with Tressa, it was amazing. We picked our colors and we were sent Tressa
yes.
braid to then make the hats from. And the same with the crystals. We chose the colors of crystals, and I've still got boxes of those color crystals hanging around the house. Yeah, if anybody needs a crystal, come round. I've got lots.
Rosie James. Speaking of your studio space, where do you make hats now?
Well, here, just behind me. So my studio is on the estate agent's details. It was called the dining room, but it's the furthest room from the kitchen. It's right. I mean, it
Hmm.
sounds like a palace. It's not a palace, but it's right. It's as far away from the kitchen as you could be. And it's by the front door, so it's quite nice when clients come in, they come straight in into the millinery room and they
Yes.
don't need to see the chaos of the rest of the house. They can just see the chaos in here. But so it's really nice. It looks out, I'm just looking now, it looks out onto a rose bed. It's not summer here, but usually there are roses outside the front. It's got a bay window. The other side, I've got loads of plan chests that I keep all my stuff in because it's quite nice to be able to pull out a drawer and see all of your Petersham, for instance. It's
Yes.
all laid out rather than in a bag, which it used to be. And then on the other side, I've got a kind of what is it? Oh, there's a fireplace. It's not an open fire, but it's a gas fire, so I can put the fire on
Yes.
in the winter. That's really nice. And then I've got those glass fronted drawers that you get in haberdashers.
Yes.
More stuff. You'd think. And I'm so lucky, I also have a block cupboard, which every so often my husband is like, I wonder if we should have a downstairs toilet. And he looks at the block cupboard, and I'm like, absolutely not. No, we should go upstairs. So
Yes.
I have all the blocks in there. And so I've got my mum's old sewing machine in here. Every time I clear up, I have a massive tidy. I'm like, right. And as soon as I start to make something, every surface is covered. Is that normal? Do other
Yeah,
millers?
it's part of my process too. I think you can tell when there's a creative spell happening because the organization disappears and no one needs to see the chaos. I'll clean it up at the end, but it's
Exactly.
like a creative bomb went off and it's chaos.
I think it has to be, doesn't it? I'm sure it does. I guess if I had more clients here, I might try and separate so the chaos went on behind a screen. But actually, what I have found is that clients love the chaos. I'm
It's
trying
part
to
of
hide
the
stuff. If I think, especially if they're
yeah.
coming to your studio in your house, I think they're expecting to see.
When someone comes into the studio space, do you have pieces to show them? How does your process normally work with your clients?
No, sometimes. Sometimes I have uh, bits and pieces to show them. I can show them the blocks. Some of the blocks I've got a felt on top that's made into that shape. I tend to design with a client. I don't say, right, I never have anything that's ready to go. What I tend to do, so somebody comes round and we start to chat, and they'll say, oh, I'm thinking about whatever it is, or they've got a photo of something, or, and then I'll say, well, I've got this, maybe it's blocked. I've got this block that's like that, and I'll show them the block. And sometimes I'll have something that I've made on that block so they can see roughly that shape. And
Yeah,
then I'm rubbish at drawing. So what I do is I make a three-dimensional, don't laugh, a three-dimensional
I am too.
mock-up of of what I might make. I always admire those milliners who give you a beautiful artistic sketch of a little mannequin head and oh, it just looks so amazing, but I can't. So what I do is I usually use cinema or whatever I've got around, a battered felt. At the moment, I tell you what I'm doing at the moment. I'm making a medieval hat for an exhibition. So what I've done is I've made the brim that I'm going to use in an old piece of chopped up cinema that was a hat that somebody gave me back to remake. So I remade the crown bit. It doesn't have a brim. So I've chopped the brim into that brim, and then I've got a bit of felt. That's what you can see in the background. That a bit of felt that I've blocked twice already to test. And that's so I just test stuff. And then I think once you've got a three-dimensional representation of what you might make, it's much easier for clients to see what it's going to look like on their head. Because I think
There's a lot
that's
of
the hard thing about having things made. If you go into a shop and buy something, you know what you're getting.
yeah, there's a lot of visualization skills required when someone comes in for let alone a custom color, but a custom design and working through that whole process. It's then also if they don't have that visualization, a lot of trust in the maker that you're going to put it together in a cohesive manner that
Yes,
aligns
totally.
with also what they're thinking.
I remember having making a hat for a bride, and she wanted those, what do they call those curly feathers? That are they biots? Oh, anyway, she wanted, we decided that she was going to have three of those feathers that curl round. And so I was sending her photos. And again, it was in quite early days of sending photos by
Yes.
computer, by email. And I sent her some photos and she sent me a really pissy email back saying, I told you that I wanted three feathers. But there aren't three feathers. And I realized that because she could only see two at a time in the photo, she thought there were only two on there.
Interesting.
So it's like, no, there are three, but you just can't see all three from one view because there's two at the front and there's one. Yeah, and I think it's a really hard thing to do, which is why I end up with so many fittings. And then I talk so much that the fittings are really long. I've tried not to
Right.
engage.
Here we are.
Thank you.
And one of your recent projects has been a book about hat linings. How did this come about and what was the process for developing it?
So it came about, I've always had a thing about linings. I think what I found is when I'm doing a commission, often I'm designing with somebody and they know what their hat's going to look like.
Yes.
So I quite like an element of surprise. So I started to use vintage scarves, you know, with those fabulous patterns or swirls, or some of them you get commemorative scarves that have got bridges and different towels, kind of tourist scarves. Um, I got a lot of those from Portobello Market. So what I started to do was put surprise linings in, so that if somebody was going to the races, they'd been through the hat. I remember making an amazing silk top hat for somebody. And but she'd been really meticulous about looking at everything, she'd seen everything. So when I put the lining in, I made a lining with a horse's face. So that when she unwrapped the box, it's like that little extra surprise. So I've always loved doing that and trying to match up a lining with a person. It's really
Yes.
nice. And then the British Millinery Association were doing, was it part of their millinery marathon? I think there were a whole month of classes. And they asked if I would do a talk on hat linings. And I
Yes.
completely buried in research about linings and how many different linings there are, and the different fabrics, which fabric you use when, how do you make those linings. And I did a talk and I really enjoyed the research of it and doing it.
Yes.
And then someone suggested that I turned it into a book. And I think it was going to be a kind of PDF online ebook. It started off, it was
Yes.
going to be an ebook. And then a friend of mine who is a cookery writer, she said it shouldn't be, it should be an actual physical book.
What
And
a good friend.
she self-publishes, and she said, I can talk you through the self-publishing. I thought, God, that sounds great. It took me a really long time to do it because what I found really hard was I knew what I wanted to say, but
Mm.
I would write it, and then there's that weird thing of thinking, oh, this isn't good enough, and then putting it aside, and then going back to it. And what really made me finish it was I had the chapters, I had it kind of how I wanted. I'd taken some photos, so I'd made all the linings that I found. Every time I found a new lining, I would make it. Sometimes I'd tweak it. Sometimes I'd slightly change how it's made, or think, oh, actually, you could use this stitch with this base. That would be nice. So I've made all the linings and I photographed them and I showed them to a friend of mine who's a photographer. And I said, I've photographed all these. Can you tell me how I can make the photos better? And she said, yeah, they're great, but actually, why don't I take them for you?
Also another very good friend.
Very good friend. So she came round with a proper setup. She had lights in here and this and that. And she photographed all the linings for me, which was amazing. And once she'd done that, there was someone else involved, and I felt that it was my duty to finish the book. I couldn't not finish
Yes.
it. And then another friend joined in and he said he'd design the cover for me. So he did that. I gave him a little brief. He designed the cover, and he also looked at some of my sketches because I decided I wanted sketch. The way old millinery books have little sketches of detail of sewing. I wanted it to be like that and not just all photographs.
Absolutely.
So I'd done little doodles, and he said, I think I can do those better and make them more cohesive because we already know that my drawing is pretty rubbish. So he did those little sketches for me. And he's actually the husband of Helen, I've mentioned
Ah,
before.
yes.
As a milliner, she said, well, I can she said, I'll proofread it from the point of a milliner and make sure all those things make sense to me.
Mm.
So she did that. And sometimes I'd send a squiggle over and Gary would say, I don't know, what is this?
What
What
are
is
we
this?
doing here?
And Helen would be like, no, 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 this is a bias seam and it needs to look like that. And you need to draw it like that. So the two of them together was amazing, amazing
Oh,
support. And then I had another friend who knows nothing about millinery. She proofread it.
right. So you
So
had a whole team in the
I had a
end.
whole team in the end, and it really taught me
Incredible.
that I'm glad I know all the process, but actually you're better with a team.
And what a great team it sounds like.
It was such a great team, such a good team. So that's how it kind of happened.
And being self-published, that's a really interesting thing to get the book out into the world. So where can people find the book?
Where do they find it? So it's Amazon. I went with Amazon self-publishing,
Yes.
and it was actually a really easy, helpful process. The way they set up, they call it KDP, and the way they've set it up makes it easy for you to put your book into a template. I used one of their templates, put the book in, put the photos in. There's a bit of kind of, I guess, is it called typesetting? It's that, just fiddling around trying to make the chapter end and the photo fit in there, and
Yes.
then making it all uniform all the way through. But it's actually a relatively easy process. And then
Yeah.
what I like about it is that you can order the book on Amazon and it's printed to order, so there's not a big stash of them
Fantastic.
anywhere.
Yeah.
But then I have a stash because I also have an Etsy shop. So if you want a signed wrapped copy, then you come via Etsy and
That's right, Jane.
I'm gonna wrap it myself and post it to you.
Oh,
So
wow.
I've got both of those streams going, depending. Some people are midnight shoppers. They don't want to wait for me to wrap it. It's like, get it to me now. And others like a bit of pink tissue paper.
Amazing. So quite an achievement in a career. Are there any other highlights that come to mind when you think about your millinery making so far?
What I love about teaching is years later, seeing somebody that I taught in that very first course at St. Martin's when they were a real beginner, seeing them carrying on with their millinery journey and seeing what they're achieving now. That's a really
Great.
lovely thing. Really nice.
It's very cool. They also must appear in different places, surprise places in your life and your millinery work as well.
Mm.
So what's a project you're working on next? What can we look forward to seeing?
So, at the moment, like today, what I'm going to work on is it's an exhibition. So it's not a millinery, it's an art exhibition where 20 artists have been asked to respond to what's called a doom painting, judgment painting. And they used to be in churches, and then in the Reformation, they were all painted over, but they're basically a judgment. So we've
Yeah,
all been asked to respond to this judgment painting. And so I'm going to be quite traditional. I'm going to do a hat based on a hennin, I think I'm going to do. So a medieval woman's hat,
yes.
that kind of shape, my own twist on it. But then I've got a little surprise plan for how to slot it into the judgment vibe, which is instead of the painting judging you, now it's social media. So that's my plan.
We will have to wait to see this one. This looks very interesting.
I'm not quite sure what I'm doing yet. That moment where you're like, so they used to have those big, and now I'm demonstrating to you these big kind of ear pad things. It's like, how am I going to make the ear pads? And I've got a bag of K-pop on the cupboard, thinking, I think what happened was that their hair was round into it, but I think the mannequin I've ordered for it doesn't have hair, so I'm going to have to put K-pop into the ear pad bits. Any
I'm sure you're
tricks?
going to come up with a very creative solution. Foam? Padding?
Padding. Yes, padding.
Mm.
Then
Mm.
I seem to have a sewing pile of 3 men's hats to make, so I'll get on with them later in the week.
Well, we can't wait to see this hat and however
Thing,
this ear
this
padding ends up coming
creation.
together. It's been
I'll put it
so
on
exciting.
Instagram.
Yes, please. We'll all follow along. It's been so great to chat with you, Jane. Thank you so much for sharing about your
Oh,
millinery
it's been
story
a
so
pleasure.
far.
That's my absolute pleasure. It's been fun.
Thank you so much for joining me for this episode. I hope you enjoyed hearing from Jane. Thank you to our Patreon podcast sponsors for their support: HATalk, Barcelona Hat Days, The Hat Magazine, Millinery Australia, Louise McDonald Milliner, Lifted Millinery, Hats by Lico, Judith A. Millinery Supply House, Hatters Millinery Supplies, Hat Academy, Hat Vlogs Australia, the Millinery Retreat School of Millinery, and Jennifer Hertz Millinery. Please check out the link to these businesses in our show notes or across on our website. Also on the website, you'll find some photos that go along with this episode. I'm your host, Lauren Ritchie, and I look forward to talking hats with you again soon.